The night was quiet, but not entirely still. At Kuala Lumpur International Airport, lights glimmered across the runways like fallen stars, and the air carried a subtle tension only airports seem to hold, a sense of anticipation, of lives in motion, of stories waiting to take flight. Among the hundreds of travelers crossing polished floors and whispering final goodbyes was a gathering of strangers about to share a destiny no one could foresee. They would board Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a routine red-eye journey bound for Beijing. But this night, March 8, 2014, would not end as planned. Instead, it would mark the beginning of one of the greatest mysteries of modern aviation, a mystery that continues to haunt the world.
The aircraft itself stood gleaming under floodlights, a massive bird of steel and engineering precision, the Boeing 777, the pride of long-haul travel. Its white fuselage bore the red and blue streak of Malaysia Airlines, a symbol of reliability and safety. For many, it was simply another flight, another step in business, family reunions, or vacations. None could know that within hours, their journey would vanish into silence. For the families waiting in Beijing, the nightmare began with a simple truth: a plane did not arrive. For the rest of the world, the nightmare was a riddle. How could something so large, so advanced, so carefully tracked, simply disappear?
There are events that shake our collective sense of certainty. Moments when technology fails and human confidence collapses. The vanishing of Flight 370 was not just an accident. It was a rupture in the modern promise that we are always connected, always tracked, always seen. The disappearance was total. No distress call, no wreckage for days, weeks, months. Just a trail of incomplete signals, strange radar data, and the silence of the sea. And the question that grew louder with every passing hour: where did Flight 370 go?
The story of Flight 370 begins not with its disappearance, but with its ordinariness. The passengers were 239 souls from 14 nations, families, children, business travelers, and the flight crew. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot with years of experience, and First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, young but capable, commanded the flight deck. They had no reason to expect anything but routine. The Boeing 777 had a sterling safety record. The route to Beijing was well-traveled, flown countless times without incident. The world outside was calm, weather clear, and the night air smooth. Everything pointed toward a predictable journey.
Shortly after midnight, boarding began. People filed into the aircraft, stowing bags, buckling children into seats, flipping through in-flight magazines, checking their phones one last time before switching to airplane mode. The smell of jet fuel and recycled air filled the cabin. The hum of engines built in the background as flight attendants guided passengers. At 12:41 a.m., Flight 370 pushed back from the gate. Wheels rolled onto the taxiway, and with a thunderous acceleration, the Boeing lifted into the night sky, leaving the lights of Kuala Lumpur behind. To the passengers, it was just another takeoff. To history, it was the last time anyone would see the plane in its natural state.
For the first 40 minutes, nothing was unusual. Air traffic control monitored the plane as it climbed to cruising altitude, 35,000 feet over the South China Sea. Pilots exchanged standard communications with Kuala Lumpur and then with Vietnamese controllers as the flight crossed into their airspace. At 1:19 a.m., the last words were spoken from the cockpit. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Calm, professional, ordinary." Then, silence. At 1:21 a.m., the plane disappeared from secondary radar, the civilian tracking system used by air traffic control. In the hours that followed, confusion reigned. Controllers assumed a technical glitch, then a missed handoff, then perhaps a loss of communication. But when Beijing's airport reported the plane never arrived, reality hardened. An international search began, with ships, satellites, and aircraft combing the South China Sea. Yet the sea revealed nothing. Not a scrap of wreckage, not an oil slick, not a floating life vest. It was as if the plane had been swallowed by the night itself.
What investigators would later uncover was even stranger. Military radar suggested the plane had not gone down immediately after disappearing from civilian systems. Instead, it had turned back. Flight 370 veered west, crossing back over the Malaysian peninsula, then curving northwest toward the Andaman Sea. The movements were deliberate, controlled. Someone was flying the plane. But why? And where were they going?
The most chilling discovery came from an unexpected source: satellite handshakes. Even after civilian radar lost the aircraft, the plane's systems continued to ping satellites. Those signals, faint and indirect, suggested the aircraft had remained airborne for nearly 7 hours after its last voice transmission. 7 hours of flight into the unknown. The data traced 2 possible arcs, one north, towards Central Asia, and another south, into the desolation of the Indian Ocean. Neither made sense, yet one had to be true. The world was faced with an impossible question. How could a modern airliner, tracked by dozens of systems, vanish so completely? The hours after the disappearance were a blur of phone calls, command centers flickering with screens, and exhausted air traffic controllers replaying logs, trying to make sense of the silence. At first, officials hesitated to admit a plane was missing. Airlines and governments often wait, hoping communication will be restored, hoping for a safe diversion. But as dawn broke over Asia, the truth grew undeniable. Flight 370 had not landed anywhere. Families waiting at Beijing's capital airport began crowding arrival gates, their eyes fixed on the information boards that stubbornly read "delayed." Delayed became missing. Missing became vanished. News broke like a thunderclap. Across television screens, anchors read the first reports with halting voices. A Boeing 777 had disappeared somewhere between Malaysia and Vietnam. For the public, disbelief was immediate. Commercial jets don't just vanish. The aircraft was one of the safest models ever built. Its engines, wings, and avionics represented decades of progress. Modern tracking meant every flight could be followed in real time. And yet, MH370 had slipped away without a trace, as though swallowed by the sky. The world leaned in, waiting for answers. The search began where logic dictated: the South China Sea. Dozens of ships were dispatched, their crews straining eyes against the waves. Aircraft circled overhead, scanning waters that stretched endlessly in all directions. In those first days, reports trickled in, possible debris spotted, an oil slick here, a floating object there. But when ships arrived, the sightings dissolved into disappointment. Fishing equipment, driftwood, nothing of significance. Each false lead drained hope and deepened the sense of impossibility. Families in Beijing were ushered into private hotel rooms, shielded from cameras, but not from grief. They clutched phones, waiting for updates that never came. Some shouted at airline representatives, demanding the truth. Others sat in stunned silence, staring into space, refusing to believe their loved ones were simply gone. Each passing hour widened the gulf between hope and reality. The hardest truth of all was that no one, no pilot, no controller, no official, could yet explain what had happened. Then came the first twist. Military radar data suggested the plane had turned back. The revelation dropped like a stone in calm water, sending ripples across the investigation.
The aircraft hadn't crashed in the South China Sea after all. It had doubled back, crossed Malaysia, and flown for hours more. This meant the initial search zone had been wrong. Entire fleets of ships and aircraft had been scouring the wrong ocean. The enormity of the mistake hit hard. Precious time had been lost.
The search area shifted westward into the Andaman Sea, then south into the Indian Ocean. But the scale was staggering. The Indian Ocean is vast, an expanse so empty that some regions see fewer ships than the surface of Mars sees rovers. Satellites had to be consulted, their silent eyes combing the Earth for faint clues. That's when investigators discovered the handshakes, the hourly pings from the plane's satellite system. These signals were not communications, but silent acknowledgments that the aircraft was still alive, still flying. They painted two possible corridors, one north into Asia and one south into the ocean. The northern path would have meant crossing heavily monitored airspace. No one saw the plane. That left the southern arc, a lonely road into nothingness.
Shifting the search to the Southern Ocean was like chasing a ghost across an abyss. Crews braced against winds, waves higher than houses, and storms that swallowed horizons. The search zone spanned tens of thousands of square miles. Ships dragged sonar equipment deep beneath the waves, listening for signals from the plane's black boxes. The devices, designed to survive crashes, emitted pings for 30 days. But the ocean was merciless. Each day of silence ate away at the countdown.
When faint signals were finally detected weeks later, hope surged. The pings sounded like black boxes echoing through the abyss. 4 separate detections gave investigators confidence. They were close. For a moment, the world believed an answer was at hand. But the signals faded. And when search vessels scoured the area with robotic submersibles, they found only empty seafloor. Cold ridges and canyons, but no wreckage. The signals had been false, perhaps echoes from equipment or the ocean itself. The trail was lost once more. As weeks turned into months, the investigation grew heavier with suspicion. If the plane had indeed flown south, someone must have guided it. But who and why? Authorities examined the crew with microscopic scrutiny. Captain Zahari's flight simulator was seized, its hard drive searched. Within, investigators found simulated flights into the southern Indian Ocean, eerily similar to MH370's presumed path. Was this evidence of a plan, or just coincidence? The line between speculation and fact blurred. The mystery deepened, refusing to yield clarity. Meanwhile, relatives of passengers clung to fragments of hope. Some believed the plane had landed secretly. Others clung to conspiracy, that governments knew more than they admitted. Each press conference felt like a performance, officials struggling to hold control over a narrative unraveling with each passing day. In the age of satellites and smartphones, the world had discovered a terrifying truth. Even now, in the 21st century, something vast and human could still vanish without explanation.
The moment when Flight 370 vanished from civilian radar is the axis around which everything else turns. At 1:21 a.m., somewhere over the dark waters of the South China Sea, the blip representing the plane disappeared from the screens of Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control. There was no warning, no mayday, no sign of trouble. To the controllers, it looked as though the plane had simply ceased to exist. Yet in reality, it was still flying, and what happened next would only deepen the enigma.
Military radar, less known to the public but more powerful, continued to track the aircraft after it disappeared from civilian systems. What it showed was baffling. Instead of maintaining its path to Beijing, the plane turned sharply west, cutting across the Malaysian peninsula. At one point, it even descended to 29,500 feet, a maneuver that suggested deliberate control. Then, It veered northwest, climbing back up, flying toward the Andaman Sea. Whoever was at the controls knew how to handle the Boeing 777. The sudden, precise movements were not the random flailings of a crippled aircraft. They were choices.
But if someone was controlling the plane, who was it? And why were the transponders, the systems that broadcast an aircraft's identity, turned off? It takes knowledge to disable them. Pilots are trained in the procedure, but it is not something that can happen by accident. That deliberate silence is what transformed Flight 370 from a tragedy into a mystery. For hours afterward, the plane flew like a ghost, invisible to the world, crossing into international waters, slipping into blackness.
Satellite signals later revealed that the aircraft did not crash immediately. Instead, it remained in the air for nearly 7 more hours after its last voice communication. 7 hours of silent flight, skimming along the edge of the world. The data pointed to a vast southern corridor into the Indian Ocean, one of the loneliest places on Earth. This was not an accident happening in minutes. It was a prolonged disappearance, stretched across time, as though someone had chosen exile for the plane itself.
Investigators wrestled with one chilling question. Was anyone alive during those hours? If the cockpit had been seized, if the crew and passengers had been incapacitated, the plane could have flown on autopilot until its fuel ran dry. But there are haunting alternatives. Perhaps one pilot locked the other out. Perhaps passengers sat unaware as the plane drifted into nowhere. Perhaps someone was awake, watching the hours slip by, aware of the end approaching.
The satellite handshakes traced arcs across the Indian Ocean. They didn't give an exact point, but a range, a curved line that spanned thousands of miles. When fuel finally ran out, the plane would have descended, uncontrolled, into the waves. But without wreckage, without black boxes, it was speculation painted on water. The mystery hardened into something almost mythic, a great machine vanishing into the ocean, leaving only mathematics and silence.
And yet, pieces did eventually appear. Not in the early days of the search, but months and years later, fragments began washing ashore on distant beaches. A wing flaperon surfaced on Réunion Island near Madagascar. Other parts, wing panels, cabin interior fragments, were found on the coasts of Mozambique and Tanzania. The ocean, slow and merciless, had carried them thousands of miles. These pieces confirmed what many already feared. Flight 370 had indeed gone into the Indian Ocean. But they raised new questions. Why were there so few? Where was the rest of the wreckage?
The discovery of debris was both a breakthrough and a curse. It confirmed a crash, but it also closed doors. With wreckage scattered by currents, pinpointing the exact location of the crash became nearly impossible. The Indian Ocean's depths are a labyrinth. Mountains taller than Everest lie hidden beneath. Trenches deeper than the Grand Canyon. Searching such a place is like scanning an alien planet with a flashlight. For every 1,000 miles of seabed surveyed, there was nothing but emptiness. The plane seemed to resist discovery, as though the ocean itself had chosen to guard its secret.
But perhaps the most haunting element of all is that no one knows why. Accidents have causes: mechanical failures, fires, weather, human error. Flight 370 doesn't fit. It flew for hours after its communication ceased. It changed course deliberately. It remained invisible by choice. Somewhere in those decisions lies the truth. But who made them and what purpose they served remains beyond reach. The mystery is not just where the plane went, but what story played out inside its cabin and cockpit as the world searched in vain.
From the moment Flight 370 disappeared, theories multiplied like shadows in a storm. Some were grounded in data, others in desperation, and still others in imagination. At the center was the unsettling fact that the aircraft's disappearance was deliberate, its transponders shut down, its course altered. Accidents happen suddenly, catastrophically, but MH370 unfolded with eerie precision. This left investigators, and the world, asking the same question. Was it human hands that guided the plane into oblivion?
One theory turned suspicion inward, toward the cockpit itself. Captain Zaharia Ahmad Shah, a man with decades of experience, was scrutinized more than anyone. He was respected, competent, and known for his meticulous flying skills. But his flight simulator, discovered in his home, contained a chilling detail. Simulated routes into the southern Indian Ocean, eerily resembling MH370's final path. Was this practice for a planned act, or coincidence twisted into evidence? Investigators debated fiercely. No definitive proof of intent was found, but the possibility lingered like smoke after a fire.
Others doubted Zahari's guilt, pointing instead to mechanical failure. Could a sudden decompression have rendered everyone unconscious, leaving the plane on autopilot until fuel exhaustion? The ghost flight theory suggested hypoxia, slow oxygen deprivation that lulled passengers and crew into sleep, unaware as the aircraft continued silently into the ocean. But skeptics argued, if that were true, why had the plane turned back so sharply, crossing controlled airspace without a single radio call? Hypoxia explains silence, but not intent.
Another theory focused on hijacking. Could intruders have seized the plane? Early speculation linked the event to terrorism, but no group claimed responsibility. The northward arc toward Central Asia suggested the possibility of landing in a remote airstrip, but radar coverage in those regions was dense, and no nation reported an unidentified aircraft. A hijacking without demands, without ransom, without a cause seemed senseless, unless the act itself was the message.
Then there was the darker speculation that one pilot had locked the other out of the cockpit. Boeing 777 doors are reinforced, designed to withstand force. If Zahari or Farik had decided to act alone, the other would have been powerless once sealed outside. Investigators knew of similar cases in aviation history. Germanwings Flight 9525 in 2015, Silkair Flight 185 in 1997, where pilots deliberately crashed planes. Could MH370 have been another such tragedy, stretched over 7 long hours of flight?
But there were technical anomalies too. Rolls-Royce, the manufacturer of the plane's engines, initially received automated reports from the aircraft hours after its disappearance. This created confusion. Why would an aircraft supposedly lost still be sending health data? Later, these were clarified as satellite pings, but in those early days, contradictions deepened distrust. Families accused governments and the airline of withholding information, fueling conspiracies of cover-ups and secret knowledge.
Some theories spiraled into the realm of the extraordinary. Could the plane have been diverted to Diego Garcia, the secretive U.S. military base in the Indian Ocean? Conspiracy theorists pointed to its location along the southern arc, speculating the plane had been intercepted or landed there in secrecy. Officials denied it emphatically, but the idea persisted, fueled by the very absence of answers. In mysteries, silence breeds imagination.
Even wilder suggestions emerged, that the plane had been hijacked remotely, or that advanced technology had cloaked it from radar. Some even whispered of extraterrestrial involvement, pointing to the sheer impossibility of a Boeing 777 vanishing in the age of satellites. Though fringe, These ideas captured the public imagination, feeding documentaries, books, and endless online speculation. The more time passed, the more the truth seemed to slip further away, leaving only shadows where answers should have been.
Amid the noise, one reality remained. Fragments of wreckage did wash ashore, all consistent with a crash in the Indian Ocean. No alternate landing sites, no intact plane hidden in secrecy, just broken pieces weathered by waves and barnacles. Theories could spin endlessly, but the ocean had spoken in its own language. Yet even with debris, one critical piece remained missing: the black boxes. Without their voices, the cockpit recorder and flight data recorder, the last hours of MH370 are locked in silence, leaving us only with possibilities. Theories will always circle back to the human factor. Was this an act of despair by a pilot, a calculated political statement, a catastrophic failure no one foresaw, or an accident twisted by circumstance into seeming deliberate? Each possibility is terrifying in its own way, and each lacks final proof. The disappearance of MH370 is not just the story of a plane, but of our struggle against the unknown. An absence so profound it forces us to imagine, because certainty remains out of reach.
In April 2014, a month after MH370 vanished, hope flickered in the abyss. Search ships in the southern Indian Ocean detected faint acoustic signals, pings that matched the frequency of the Boeing 777's black boxes. The discovery electrified the world. For the first time, the silence seemed to crack, replaced by the beating heart of a clue. Crews aboard the Australian vessel Ocean Shield reported hearing the signals 4 separate times. To families waiting in Beijing and Kuala Lumpur, it felt like a lifeline had been thrown into the darkness. Perhaps the end was near. Perhaps answers were finally within reach.
Searchers deployed robotic submersibles to scour the seafloor, descending into blackness thousands of meters below. Lights cut through the dark like lanterns in a cavern, illuminating rocky ridges and trenches. The ocean floor appeared alien, silent, indifferent. Days passed, then weeks. The pings faded, and the submersibles found nothing. The ocean mocked human effort. What had seemed a breakthrough dissolved into another mirage. Families who had clung to hope were left broken once more, their wounds deepened by yet another cruel twist. For the relatives, the psychological toll was unbearable. In Beijing, they protested at government buildings, holding photographs of their loved ones, demanding transparency. "Tell us the truth!" they shouted, convinced officials were concealing what they knew. In Kuala Lumpur, vigils burned into the night, candles glowing against dark skies, names whispered as prayers. The absence of answers became a living torment. To lose someone is devastating, but to lose them without explanation is a wound that never closes. The search itself became one of the most expensive in aviation history, stretching across months and years. Each day, ships mapped uncharted regions of the ocean floor, covering thousands of square miles. The effort resembled not just a search for a plane, but an exploration of an alien world. Yet with each mile scanned, the absence grew louder. At times it felt as though the plane did not want to be found, as if its secret was bound to the ocean's silence. And yet, tiny fragments would surface, physical proof that MH370 had shattered. The first, the flaperon, washed up on Reunion Island more than a year later. When photographs of the barnacle-encrusted piece circulated, they became an icon of grief,
a reminder that the ocean had swallowed the plane, but not all of it. Other fragments appeared later, parts of the interior, wing panels, cabin sections, each piece like a ghost delivered by the tide. For the families, they were cruel gifts, proof of death, but no proof of why.
The climax of the search came when hopes for discovery collided with the scale of impossibility. After more than 2 years of operations, the search was suspended in January 2017. Ships had scanned 46,000 square miles of seabed but found nothing. The ocean had reclaimed its silence. For the families, the suspension was unbearable, an official declaration that the world had given up. For investigators, it was a humiliation. The most advanced technology, billions of dollars, international cooperation, and no answers.
But perhaps the greatest climax of all was internal. The unbearable weight of not knowing. Every theory, every fragment, every failed clue pushed the families and the world into a spiral of obsession. For them, grief was not just about loss, but about an unfinished story. The climax of MH370 is not found in wreckage or discovery. It is found in the human heart, at the breaking point where hope and despair collide, leaving only silence behind.
The ocean holds its secrets well. Long after the search ships returned to their ports, long after the headlines dimmed, the mystery of Flight 370 remains suspended in the silence between waves. On quiet beaches, fragments of the plane still wash ashore, mute relics of a night that has no end. Each piece tells us something, but not enough. A bolt, a panel, a wing fragment. Together, they sketch the outline of tragedy, but the center of the canvas remains blank. The wreckage lies somewhere in the abyss, locked in darkness, and for now beyond human reach.
For the families, closure never came. They live in the liminal space between grief and hope, where each day reopens the wound. Some have accepted the ocean swallowed their loved ones. Others believe the truth is still out there, waiting to be revealed, hidden by forces they cannot see. In hotel rooms, in shrines at home, in quiet corners of memory, photographs remain, faces frozen in time. The disappearance is no longer just about an aircraft. It is about the endurance of human sorrow.
The mystery of MH370 forces us to confront something uncomfortable, that even in an age of satellites, radar, and instant communication, the world is still vast enough to swallow a machine the size of a skyscraper. We tell ourselves we are always connected, always in control, but Flight 370 is proof of the opposite, that sometimes things slip into silence, leaving only shadows where certainty should be. It is not just a failure of technology, but a reminder of our own fragility.
For investigators, the story ends with mathematics, satellite arcs, and empty search grids. For the families, it ends with absence. For the rest of us, it ends with a question we cannot stop asking. How could a plane disappear in the modern world? And how can it remain hidden still? That question lingers like a ghost long after the lights of the search vessels faded from the horizon.
Perhaps one day the wreckage will be found. Perhaps the black boxes will speak, their voices rising from the ocean floor to tell us what really happened in those final hours. But until then, the story remains unfinished, a wound carved into aviation history, a riddle left adrift, and the ocean keeps its silence, vast and eternal.
And so, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 becomes less a story about a plane and more a story about us, our need for answers, our fear of the unknown, and our unwillingness to accept silence. In the end, the sky swallowed the plane, the ocean buried it, and the world was left with the most haunting mystery of our time. And so, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 becomes less a story about a plane and more a story about us, our need for answers, our fear of the unknown, and our unwillingness to accept silence. In the end, the sky swallowed the plane, the ocean buried it, and the world was left with the most haunting mystery of our time.
So we ask you, what do you believe happened to Flight 370? Was it a tragedy born of mechanical failure? A ghost flight drifting into the abyss? Was it deliberate, a decision carved into the night sky? Or was it something we have yet to imagine, a truth that still hides in shadows? Your thoughts, your questions, your voice become part of this story, because the world may never stop searching.
And as this haunting journey lingers in your mind, remember this: mysteries endure because we carry them forward. The story of MH370 is unfinished, and perhaps it always will be. But in keeping it alive, in discussion, in memory, in relentless pursuit, we ensure those aboard are never forgotten. Continue the search, not only in the ocean, but in the questions you ask, in the conversations you begin, and in the mysteries you refuse to let die.